The highway was a lonely black ribbon stretching endlessly into the fog. The road signs glowed dully under my headlights, their words blurring together in my tired vision. 1:47 a.m. I was exhausted, my limbs heavy on the steering wheel, my mind fogged with drowsiness. I shouldn't have been driving so late. I had spent the weekend at my parents' house in a remote rural town. What was supposed to be a short visit had stretched into hours of fixing leaky pipes, moving old furniture, and listening to my father talk about his glory days. By the time I finally got into my car, the sky was already pitch black. The road was eerily silent, no other cars in sight. Just miles of trees on either side, their skeletal branches reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. Occasionally, the mist would part just enough for the full moon to cast pale beams across the asphalt. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in my rearview mirror. It was quick, almost too quick to register. A dark shape in the back seat, just a fleeting glimpse before the fog closed in around me again. My stomach clenched. I turned my head sharply, my breath catching in my throat. The back seat was empty. Just my old duffel bag and a hoodie sprawled across the seat, exactly where I had left them. I let out a shaky breath. You're just exhausted. Your mind is playing tricks on you. But my hands were gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my knuckles turning white. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the tires against the pavement. Still, I couldn't shake the unease slithering up my spine. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. The road remained desolate. No gas stations, no motels, no signs of civilization. Just the endless stretch of highway. Then it happened again. The shape. This time I felt it. A presence. A slow, deliberate exhale against the back of my neck. I shot through my veins. I gripped the wheel so hard it hurt, my heart beat a frantic drum in my ears. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I flicked my eyes to the rear view mirror, and something was staring back at me. A face, not fully formed, not entirely human. Its hollow eyes gleamed, its mouth a dark abyss, lips stretched into something that might have been a grin or a snarl. Its features flickered in and out, like a dying signal on an old television screen. And then it was gone. The air in the car felt thick, suffocating. My breathing was too loud, ragged. The moment stretched unbearably long, my vision swimming. Was I hallucinating? Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? I slapped my cheek hard. The sharp sting jolted me back to the present. My car was still on the road, still moving. The dashboard glowed a dull green. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. Nothing. My gut told me to turn around, to drive back to my parents' house. But that was ridiculous. Whatever this was, exhaustion, stress, paranoia, it was all in my head. Still, I pressed my foot down a little harder on the gas, eager to get home. The road twisted ahead, dipping into a tunnel carved through the hills. The moment I entered, my headlights flickered just for a split second. And when they came back on, the radio started playing. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even turned it on. But there it was, whispering through the speakers. A faint, crackling voice. I turned the volume down. It didn't stop. The whispering grew louder. Don't look in the mirror. My blood turned to ice. A sudden jolt of pressure on my shoulder made me whip my head around. Nothing. I swerved. nearly clipping the edge of the tunnel. My hands were shaking as I yanked the wheel back under control. The whispering stopped. The radio went silent. The car settled. But in the rearview mirror, something had moved. I saw just for a second a shadow slipping out of view. And then the tunnel was behind me, and I was alone on the road again. Except I wasn't. I could feel it. Something had gotten into the car with me. The air inside the car had changed. I couldn't explain it, but something felt different, as if I was no longer alone. The silence wasn't empty. It pressed in around me, thick, suffocating, alive. The tunnel was far behind me now, swallowed by the darkness of the highway. I forced myself to keep driving, eyes locked on the road ahead, but the rearview mirror sat there, waiting, daring me to look again. I didn't want to, not after what I had just seen, but I could feel something shifting in the back seat. A quiet rustling, a subtle shift in weight, like someone readjusting their position. I gritted my teeth. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. Then the whispering started again. Not from the radio this time. From behind me. You shouldn't have kept driving. The voice was dry, distant, right at my ear. I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched, tires skidding across the pavement. My heart was pounding, my breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. I twisted around. The back seat was empty. Nothing but my duffel bag and hoodie. No sign of an intruder, no footprints, no one. And yet, the air still felt heavy, like something was there, watching me, waiting. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I had two choices: keep driving or turn back. Every rational part of me screamed that I was just exhausted, that I was imagining things. But deep down I knew something was very, very wrong. I put my foot back on the gas and kept going. The road stretched endlessly ahead. The farther I drove, the worse the feeling got. A distant click, click, click echoed through the car, rhythmic and unnatural. I checked the dashboard. Nothing was out of place. I reached for the radio, but it was already off. The sound continued. Click, click, click. Then I realized it was coming from the rearview mirror. Click, 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 like fingernails tapping against glass. I felt a sudden, paralyzing chill roll over my body. Slowly, against every instinct in my body, I looked. In the reflection, something was sitting in my back seat. A shadowy figure, barely visible, its face lost in darkness. But I could see its hand, long, bony fingers curled against the glass, tapping in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Click, click, click. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was watching me, and then it smiled. The moment I saw it, my vision flickered. The road, the car, the dashboard, all of it glitched like an old VHS tape struggling to play. My hands twitched, my grip on the wheel faltering. The world around me seemed to stutter, reality breaking apart at the edges. And then everything went black. When I came to, my car was parked in the middle of the road. The engine was off. The headlights were dim. I had no memory of stopping. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. 2:36 a.m. I had lost nearly an hour. A cold sweat dripped down my spine. My heart hammered in my chest as I checked the back seat again. Empty. But the mirror was cracked. A long, jagged split ran down the center of the glass, distorting my reflection. I wasn't sure what was more terrifying, seeing something in the mirror, or knowing that it had been there long enough to break it. I couldn't move. The crack in the rearview mirror was thin but deep, splitting my reflection into two distorted halves. One side of my face looked normal. The other wasn't me. My breath hitched in my throat. The figure that had been in my back seat was gone, but I could still feel it. A presence, a weight in the air, an absence that felt too full. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, calm down. I reached up, running my fingers over the crack in the mirror. It was cold, ice cold, like the glass had been left in the dead of winter, coated in frost. A violent shudder ran down my spine as I yanked my hand away. That's when I saw the smudge. A dark handprint, barely visible on the glass. Not mine. My stomach turned. How the hell did it get there? I wiped at it, heart hammering. It wouldn't come off. No, this was wrong. All of this was wrong. I grabbed my phone, gripping it so tight my fingers ached. The screen flickered as I tried to pull up my GPS. The highway was still there, stretching ahead of me. The only way back was through the darkness. My body screamed at me to drive. Leave. Escape. But then the radio crackled. A voice whispered through the static. You can't leave. I slammed my hands over my ears. No, I am not hearing this. But the voice grew louder. We see you. My phone screen went black. A heavy silence settled over the car, thick and unnatural. And then the overhead light flickered on. I froze. I hadn't touched it. The car's interior was bathed in sickly yellow light, too dim, too unnatural. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the seats. Then, from the rearview mirror, something moved. I didn't want to look. I shouldn't have looked. But my eyes flicked up, just for a second, and my blood turned to ice. The figure was back, but it was closer. No longer a vague shadow. No longer just a shape in the back seat. It was leaning forward, its face inches from mine, a gaping black mouth, hollow, bottomless eyes, a stretched, unnatural grin, and a whisper that felt like it slithered into my ear. Let me in, I screamed. My body acted before my mind could catch up. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires screeching against the pavement. The car lurched forward, the force nearly knocking me back into my seat. The rearview mirror rattled violently. I didn't care. I needed to get away. The road ahead stretched on, black and empty, swallowing me whole. The headlights barely cut through the suffocating darkness. My hands were shaking on the wheel, knuckles white, breath coming in sharp gasps. Don't look, don't look, don't look. But the whispering didn't stop. It curled around me, seeping into my skull, twisting in my ears. We see you. You can't run. You let us in. The car jerked violently to the side. I almost lost control. My heart was pounding so hard I thought my ribs would break. I gritted my teeth, forcing my eyes on the road. That's when I saw the sign. A rusted highway marker, barely standing. The words nearly faded away. Tunnel ahead. Tunnel? My stomach dropped. No, that was impossible. I had left the tunnel miles ago. Then why was it a flicker in the rearview mirror? A blur of movement. I gripped the wheel tighter. Don't look. Keep driving. But the whispers were right there. And then A hand, ice-cold fingers curled around my shoulder. I couldn't breathe. The fingers tightened on my shoulder. Ice-cold. Unrelenting. Wrong. I couldn't move. My entire body seized up, frozen in place, every muscle locked in sheer terror. The grip wasn't just cold, it was unnatural, like touching something that wasn't meant to exist in this world. Not real. Not real. Not real. I forced myself to breathe, my gasps sharp and shallow. The car was still moving, speeding down the highway that shouldn't exist. The tunnel ahead loomed, its entrance a gaping black maw. My heartbeat pounded in my skull. I had no choice. I had to look. Slowly, I turned my head, and what I saw was nothing. No hand, no figure, no thing behind me, just the empty back seat, the shadows stretching too long, too deep. The rearview mirror trembled as my headlights flickered across the tunnel entrance. The road ahead was swallowing me whole. My car dragged forward like the darkness itself was pulling me in. Then the voice. You're already here. The world around me twisted. I slammed my foot on the brake. The car veered violently to the side, tires screeching. The force threw me forward, my chest slamming against the steering wheel. My breath left my lungs in a choked gasp. Silence. No whispering. No cold fingers. No unseen presence. The tunnel was gone. I was parked on the side of the road, headlights illuminating a broken sign. Exit 66. Last stop before Dark Hollow. What? I hadn't taken an exit. My phone was in my lap, the screen flickering with static before the GPS came back to life. I wasn't on the same road anymore. My stomach twisted into a knot. I slowly turned my gaze to the rearview mirror. The crack had spread, snaking across the glass like a web of fractures. But worse, the smudge was still there. Darker, more defined. A handprint. I had to get out of here. I threw the car in a drive and sped forward. The road stretched into the night, winding through dense, endless forest. No signs, no landmarks, just miles and miles of darkness pressing against the windshield. Then, ahead, a gas station. My breath hitched in relief. A single flickering light buzzed above the pumps, the building itself small and weathered. It was the only thing for miles. I pulled in, the tires crunching on the gravel. The station looked abandoned, but the door was open. I stepped out, my legs shaky. The moment I did, the air changed. Heavy, electric, like the sky before a storm. I pushed open the door. A bell jingled, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive silence inside. The air smelled old. Dust, stale coffee, and something else. Something. Rotting. I took a hesitant step forward. The rows of shelves were mostly empty, scattered with forgotten items, expired chips, faded newspapers, old cigarette packs. At the counter, an old man sat motionless, his back to me. The hairs on my arm stood on end. I cleared my throat. Excuse me? He didn't move. I stepped closer. His skin was pale. His eyes, I sucked in a breath. His eyes weren't real. They were glass, like the kind in a taxidermy mount, staring, unseeing. A shiver ran down my spine. I took a step back, every instinct in me screaming to leave. Then, the radio behind the counter crackled to life. A voice. Distorted. Warped. Why did you stop?" The man's head snapped toward me. His mouth split into a grin. "They're right behind you." My breath caught in my throat. The old man's grin widened unnaturally, his lips stretching too far, too thin. His glass eyes reflected the dull light above, making them look empty, hollow pits where something else was looking out. "They're right behind you." The radio behind the counter hissed with static. Then, in the silence, a sound, a soft, wet breath. "Right. Behind. Me." I whipped around. Nothing. Just the empty store, the flickering light casting long, jagged shadows across the dusty floor. But the feeling of presence was crushing, pressing against my back like something was standing there, unseen, watching, waiting. The radio crackled again. "You let them in." The old man's voice was layered now, overlapping with something deeper, something else. I stumbled backward, knocking over a rack of expired snacks. My pulse hammered in my skull as I bolted for the door, nearly tripping over my own feet. But when I grabbed the handle, it didn't move. Locked. No, no, no. The lights overhead flickered violently, the buzzing turning into a piercing whine. My own reflection in the store window twisted, the glass warping. And then I saw it, a dozen sets of eyes in the reflection, all of them staring back at me, unblinking, hollow. And then they blinked. The store plunged into darkness. I screamed. I don't know how long the darkness lasted. It could have been seconds, minutes, hours. All I remember is the pressure, like something heavy was pressing down on me, suffocating, drowning me in the pitch black. And then a sudden release. I gasped, lungs burning, my body collapsing onto something rough and uneven. Concrete. I was outside, on the pavement. The gas station was gone. In its place, just an empty parking lot under a flickering streetlight. No building, no door, no old man, nothing. My car was still there, engine running, door wide open like I had never left. I scrambled to my feet, staggering toward it, throwing myself into the driver's seat. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, my foot slamming on the gas. I didn't look back. I just drove. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the forest pressing in from all sides. But I didn't care. I didn't stop. Not until I saw the first sign of life again. A small diner, glowing with the warm yellow light of neon signs. I pulled in, barely able to breathe, my whole body trembling. I needed to see people, real people, something normal. I stumbled inside. The diner was nearly empty, save for a waitress behind the counter and an old man drinking coffee at a booth. I slid into a seat, my hands gripping the table like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. The waitress approached, her voice soft, concerned. "You okay, hon? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to speak. My throat was too dry. She smiled sympathetically. "Don't worry. You're safe here." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then I froze. Because behind her, in the reflection of the diner's window, I saw it. The smudge in the glass. The same one that had been in my rearview mirror. Only now it was closer. And this time, it wasn't a smudge. It was a face, staring back at me, and it was smiling.